am not a fanboy. Sadly, it's true. I do not sufficiently gush, geek out, squee, obsess over, memorize, worship, or collect anything to nerd boy levels. That's just not who I am. And I had no idea that my lack of geekiness was a problem until the time I dated the biggest fanboy in the world. The first time he showed me around his apartment, he paused to stand at the closed door to his bedroom with his hand resting solemnly on the doorknob as if it was the portal to a sacred mausoleum. And I suppose that's exactly what it was. He liked Batman. No, he loved Batman. Actually, forget that. Love is not even a big enough word to capture his feelings on the topic. Since he was a child, he had nurtured a borderline maniacal affection for the fictional hero, and all the evidence was inside this 10 by 10 foot room. He opened the door with a sheepish sort of side grin and studied my face for a reaction. It was like an over-inventoried toy store, if there was such a thing as a Batman-only toy store. Black plastic shelving stood waist high and held layers of Batman toys, games, stacks of Batman comics, expensive collectible figurines, miniature Batmobile, replica Batarangs, life-size Batman cowls, DVDs, posters, cereal boxes, and even vintage underoos. Above the racks, hung in perfect rows to the ceiling, was an innumerable array of new and vintage Batman figures, some dating back to the early 1970s. He described his collection as tastefully psychotic. This sublime gallery of nerddom was so busy and uniformly themed that the neatly made futon bed in the corner looked completely out of place. Only once you saw this futon were you reminded that this was actually a bedroom. And the life-size posters of a young, mostly naked Tracy Lords were the only indication that it did not belong to a 7-year-old boy. After a few more dates, I learned that not only did this man obsess over Batman, but his brain was like a black hole of trivia that absorbed just about every nook and crevice of pop culture from the late 1970s on. Superheroes, comics, 80s counterculture music, everything. But by far, the biggest runner-up to his Batman preoccupation was his insane love and knowledge of movies. He was like a walking IMDb. At the slightest prompting, he could rattle off names of all the main and lesser-known actors for thousands of pictures, from horror to comedy, indie to blockbuster, and from well-known to completely obscure. For example, I could flip through the channels on TV and land for 5 seconds on a random movie, even during one of the quiet scenes with nothing but background music on for sound, and he would shout from the other room, "Are you watching Poltergeist?" And he was right every fucking time. His steel trap movie memory was a great party trick, too. Our group of friends loved to play the movie game, where person one would shout out a movie title and challenge the next to name an actor who was in it. The third person would then pick another movie that actor was in, and so on. It was horrible. Each time I played, I was knocked out of the game right away and left to sit in silence for the next half hour and watch like a child who had to go to bed early and let the adults talk. Of course, most of our friends were movie trivia ninjas, too, who would inevitably drag the game into the very darkest reaches of movieland obscurity by round 3. But no matter how long it went on for, my boyfriend was always the last one standing. "What do you mean you don't remember if you've seen Goodfellas? How do you forget something like that?" This was a typical question aimed at me throughout the course of our relationship. "I don't know, I just don't remember," I would say, and he would cringe. That answer was like kryptonite for him. Superman reference intended. "Well then, what the hell did you do for your entire childhood? Hide under your bed?" "I don't know," I'd respond, suddenly feeling more than a little ashamed about my muddy-footed, tree-climbing tomboy roots. I played outside, built houses, tree houses, went swimming and fishing in the lake near my house. When the sun was out, my parents never let us sit around inside. "So then, what did you do in the wintertime when it was snowing?" he asked. I tried not to point out that we could still go outside in the winter and play in the snow, but he grew up in San Diego, so I left it alone. He tried to hide his disappointment, but I could tell that clearly nothing about me was really up to nerd girl snuff. Over the decade that we were together, the skills and worldly knowledge that I possessed seemed to count for less and less as compared to his lifetime movie and pop culture education. He was repeatedly amazed and appalled by the number of classic cult movies I never watched, TV shows I never followed, and comic book characters I never so much as heard of while I was growing up in the 80s. And if I brought up that there were actually some films I watched back in the day and loved enough to stir my soul into a fanboy frenzy, the admission just seemed too little and much too late. You only like movies, he would frequently say to me. You don't love them like I do. This is the point that many of you relationship-savvy folks might have spotted the red flag. The bat signal, if you will. But me? Nah. You see, deep down inside, I was the girl with knotted brown hair who lived with her dad and her brother and liked to catch frogs in the backyard, go sledding down hills of sheer ice, and race boys on my 10-speed bike. What he wanted was one of those really hot nerd girls who wore pigtail buns like Princess Leia and had a penchant for Japanese anime. I really wanted the heart of my Batman fanboy friend. I really wanted to be that hot nerd girl, but I just wasn't. So I faked it. I started sporting black, tight-fitted t-shirts with femme Batman logos on them and fancy-ass Batman leggings. I bought a Wonder Woman bobblehead doll and displayed it proudly in my work cubicle. I subjected myself to weekend-long cult movie marathons and memorized all the important lines, so like I was a good little nerd girl. I went all in, baby, and eventually I even sort of began to like my new hobby. I was so dedicated to becoming that hot nerd girlfriend that I even joined this man on a trip to the San Diego Comic-Con. We were living in Boston then, so I took a whole week off work to travel to here for the first time. I'd always wanted to see San Diego. But the trip was to see the con, so I spent most of the week following him around the convention center. We weaved up and down the crowded aisles. We marveled at all the celebrity sightings, and we even slowed down to survey the bevy of scantily clad booth babes in various superhero costumes, most of which I couldn't name. I was impressed by the sheer magnitude of geekdom that was there, but mostly with a sort of perplexed, slack-jawed admiration. Honestly, I didn't get it. From a distance, the show was incredible and awe-inspiring. The booths were huge, elaborate, and gorgeously designed, something any creative brain like mine could appreciate. But from up close, the show was built mostly out of toys, t-shirts, cheap costuming, and stacks upon stacks of comic books. The more I looked at it all, the more the place reminded me of the kinds of trash piles created after a weekend of emptying out a deceased grandparent's garage. Obviously, the whole convention thing wasn't for me. While everyone else there was busy waiting hours in line to buy some exclusive collector's item or geeking out over the celebrities openly walking the floor, I just wanted to be outside. I wanted to go for a run in the mountains, get lost, have an adventure. I wanted to go smell the desert air, squish some California sand between my bare toes, order a giant burrito, and watch the afternoon sun set over the Pacific Ocean. But this was neither the time nor the place for a hippy-dippy, sun-dwelling, outdoorsy type like myself. I did not fit in. The longer I was there, the more apparent it became that in this enormous convention center stuffed full of DC and Marvel fanboys, Star Wars geeks, unshowered Magic the Gathering nerds, and sweaty palm 38-year-old virgins, I was the biggest loser. The Batman guy and I are still friends, but we're no longer a couple. One of the reasons why is that for all the faking I did, for all the Batman masks I walked around in, and all the cult fan films I saw, the truth remains that I just never got the whole nerd thing. And there's another thing I didn't get until now. The whole time I was trying to be somebody else for him, he was just busy being himself. A man who had something he really, really loved to do, and who happened to share that love with thousands of other people, none of whom were me. I now realize that being a fan of something isn't about adopting a certain persona for somebody else. It's about coming together with others who are already just like you. Since then, I've taken a page from his book and started acting like myself again. I prioritize my own hobbies, whether I'm geeking out about all the overnight miles I get to run at my next Ragnar race or struggling to stand up on my surfboard out on the waves in La Jolla Beach while sporting a wedgie and a big old dorky grin. I watch only the TV shows and movies that I want to, and sometimes I'll even take a novel out instead and read in the middle of the living room, even if it's Game of Thrones night. Yeah. The best part is that I now have someone beside me who loves to share in all my adventures. A man who actually is willing to go on a road trip with me for an entire week, who tolerates me taking awkward photos of him when I promised I was shooting the waterfall, who sits out there on surfboards with me, patiently reminding me not to pop up to my knees again and to stay the hell out of the way of the real surfers. Someone willing to sign up for a half marathon just so he can sing show tunes with me during the hard parts of the race. And most importantly, someone who loves me to my very tree-hugging tomboy core. Who'd ever thought? I guess what I'm saying is the point of this life is to find your inner nerd. She's there somewhere and she needs an outlet. It doesn't matter if she's hosting Lord of the Rings marathons or training to run the Big Sur marathon. She's still a nerd girl. And either way, she still looks pretty hot in that Batman shirt.
That was Trisha Berube.